Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to NEHEN 3.0 update. It's my pleasure to introduce from the Massachusetts Health Data Consortium, Denny Brennan and Lauren Beadle.
Thank you, Michael. It's a pleasure to be here, and on behalf of my colleague Lauren Beadle, who will be taking us through today's presentation, we are grateful for the opportunity to present to the WEDI community what we're doing in Massachusetts and what we think can be replicated in many other markets around the country. So without further ado, Lauren, why don't you take it from here?
Thank you. And thank you for saying that while I struggled to get off mute. We're here, as Michael said, and Denny, we're here to talk about NEHEN 3.0, which is the project name for this, we think innovative, cost-effective network solution to essentially streamline administrative burden with that transaction and clinical data exchange. So I can advance, there we go. So we'll do a really quick kind of setting the scene of what the problems and a lot of the tailwinds are around prior authorization, especially give you kind of that high level overview of NEHEN 3.0. Some of you may already be familiar with it. And then, talk about some of the conversations we've been having, some of the questions or explanations we've been receiving as we talk more with payers and providers in Massachusetts about NEHEN 3.0. And provide a little more granular information on NEHEN and when we go through that section, and then we'll leave the rest for Q&A if anyone has any questions. So, there's a ton of alignment on the fact that the prior authorization workflow in its current form is not very efficient, and I'm sure I am preaching to the choir here. There are a lot of issues related to the workflow. There's confusion around whether or not prior auth is even required. There's a ton of time and energy and FTEs that go through, finding the requirements, compiling a submission, submitting it, and then following up on the decision. And as a result of that, first and foremost, there's an increase in the event that patient's care may be delayed. There are associated extra costs with how this workflow is conducted and those potential delays. I've already mentioned, a lot of time and energy goes into this process. And a lot of the denials are due to the fact that there's not enough information, or the right information isn't included in the submission. We can look back at a lot of the activities that have really been fueling prior authorization reform. We look at the 21st Century Cures Act as this moment where everyone was like, there is so much inefficiency in the health data exchange industry. Data is siloed, patients don't have access to their own information, and prior authorization really became this prime example of that kind of inefficiency. We've seen a ton of activities in the industry and these multi-stakeholder industry work group activities, developing different health data exchange standards for different transactions, developing, testing, and improving these new implementation guides. And now we have that for prior authorization with FHIR APIs and the Da Vinci implementation guides. CMS has seen that and all of that progress, and they've put their weight behind FHIR APIs and have required those under CMS 0057F, requiring those impacted public payers to support and maintain automated prior authorization capabilities by January 1st of 2027. And I think I'm going to start saying December 1st of 2026, because that sounds, way sooner. This is coming up soon. And then we have a lot of state activities, not only mirroring the federal requirements, but going further. Automation is not going to solve all the issues related to prior authorization, but it's going to be a huge step forward in streamlining the process. And states also want to ensure that we have that baseline data on the process to continue to reform this process. I'm gonna hand it over to Denny now, who's gonna talk about MHDC and NEHEN and how together these organizations, which are now one, have really been leaders and partners and collaborators throughout all these activities to reform prior authorization.
Thank you, Lauren. MHDC, the Massachusetts Health Data Consortium, has been around since 1978. We're approaching our 50th anniversary. And we merged with the New England Healthcare Exchange Network under MHDC so that we could combine our capabilities to bring people together, the trust and the goodwill that we've established over the last 48 years. NEHEN has been in business since 1996 and operates an EDI clearinghouse that's managed by MHDC and is designed to provide a community answer to a clearinghouse exchange. And combining that with what we do at MHDC, we saw that we had a platform to build automation to the next level. So we've our experience with prior auth goes pretty far back. We've led 2 successful prototype implementations, one that was pre-Fire API and was a proprietary solution, but demonstrated that automation really reaped enormous benefits, especially in reducing the number of prior auths that were required in the first place. We did a second prototype that involved a major insurer and a major provider, and we tested the first step in prior authorization, coverage requirements discovery, and produced results that again showed that just knowing whether or not you need a prior auth can reduce the number of prior auths that a clinician or a care provider needs to submit by as much as 70%. We've done a lot of work in multi-stakeholder collaboratives. We believe in payer-provider collaboration, and we believe that when payers and providers get together to solve problems that they share and that require, scale, a common sense of purpose, and the recognition that each one cannot solve the problem on their own, we can deliver really significant benefits. We conducted a full ICD-10 conversion for Massachusetts in 2015 for over 90 organizations. And we demonstrated that, when we work together and we bring organizations that are at best competitive and, and at worst times adversarial, we can bring them together to solve a common problem. And we've earned recognition, especially winning Wheaties Innovation and Health IT Award. So we're very proud of what we've accomplished, and we're really excited for what we have coming next.
Thanks, Denny. As I mentioned, I'll give kind of a high-level overview of NEHEN 3.0, which is really this multi-payer, multi-provider health information collaborative exchange that is simplifying and consolidating the infrastructure necessary to automate administrative and clinical health information exchange. And we're starting with prior authorization and quality data for quality measures. So, I just mentioned it's simple. We're providing this single access point for all health plans and providers to access their trading partners who are on the network. We're enabling compliance with CMS 0057F, as well as other related state requirements or reporting requirements related to administrative and clinical data exchange. We're operating on a community governance model. So we're looking to our users to inform us, what improvements in prior authorization and clinical data automation would be most useful for them. And then to also tell us, the next use cases that they want us to tackle, because we're designed to go beyond prior authorization and clinical data exchange. And then, I think I mentioned we're functioning as this shared utility where, it's primarily payer funded, but folks are paying for their usage on the network. So, we're using this shared infrastructure where, avoiding any redundancy or wasted technology investment by all using the same solution. So to be a little more specific about exactly what we're offering, we've bucketed them into tier 1 and tier 2 services. So our tier 1 services are these hosted or pass-through services for automated prior authorization. We're following the Da Vinci implementation guide. So Fire to Payers hosted CRD rules engine, Fire to Payers hosted DTR service, and then Fire to Payers PAS or prior authorization support for automated approval in real or near real time. And we're also supporting Firebase bulk clinical data exchange, which is going to transfer all the quality measures data at once. Under tier 2, these are more a la carte. These are optional and are layered on top of tier 1 services. So these are managed or hosted services for automated prior auth. So we would be hosting guidelines, hosting that entire transaction. We're also supporting the additional APIs that are mandated under the CMS 0057 rule, bundling together the patient access and provider directory APIs, also offering payer-to-payer as well as the provider access API. And then we'll also be offering, again, hosted quality data exchange services and working on developing this measure-by-measure exchange.
And if I can just add briefly, as it says on the top of our screen, we are working, our technology partner is the Omega. And we have, Lauren and I are in Dallas now at a Z Omega client conference, and we're excited about the capabilities that the Z Omega platform called Health Unity brings to what we want to accomplish with NEHEN 3.0.
Yes, thank you so much for not having me gloss over that. Yes, we are really excited to be partnering with Z Omega to do this. As far as our participation status, I'm going to hand it over to Denny, who has, explained how much work MHDC and NEHEN together have been working on it related to prior auth, and also in terms of beginning to get this network service off the ground.
Thank you, Lauren. This is a long and at times arduous, but generally a very successful process. We're right now at the point, as you can see at the bottom of this chart, I'm not going to go through each of these line items, but we had three things that we had to accomplish. We had to get a contract with a technology vendor, and we went through a comprehensive RFP process evaluating close to 24 vendors across a number of different criteria and different sort of stages of evaluation. And we chose the Omega, and the first thing we needed to do was let's get to the Z Omega contract. We have to have the contract in hand. We won't execute it until we have payers and providers on the network, and especially payers who are funding the network. But we needed to make sure we had that done, and we completed that, which allowed us to then, provide to our trading partners what they need to get to yes within their own organizations. We call this the bluff deck, the bottom line up front deck, and it was designed to provide answers to questions, documentation, what kind of functional architectural requirements were needed within the health plan, especially. Providers are looking to their electronic health records, and we've been in conversations with a number of the health record vendors who are increasingly moving to FHIR as an interoperability strategy, in keeping with the information blocking provisions that are becoming increasingly, or likely to become increasingly stringent. But we wanted to make sure we got to giving everything that was needed by our trading partners, especially the health plans, because providers won't join a network if health plans aren't there. And health plans know they need to provide this service if they're going to reduce the burden, not only be compliant, but to reduce the burden. And over the course of this process, we've come to an understanding with our health plan partners that this is important for them across all their lines of business. This is a fundamentally new way of engaging and working with providers, and ultimately working with consumers, patients, members. And we wanted to have in their hands what we call sort of the funding agreement and the participation agreement. And those two documents are what are sort of the second set of contracts that we wanted to put in front of both our payers and providers. Payers sign funding agreements and participation agreements. Providers sign just participation agreements. So, without getting into the gory details, the next thing was, how do we get to yes now that we have contracts with our vendors, contracts all but executed with our payer and provider partners? And this is where we began the process that we're in now, which is very, very close. I mean, you can see we have the 15th of May as our expected date to sign founding partner agreements. And these are the funders, 4 major health plans in Massachusetts that we're looking to sign agreements with in the coming weeks. And that's a critical, essential first step to bring the participation agreements for both payers and providers into the discussion, and to secure signing of those participation agreements before the end of the second quarter. We want to fund the network. We want to stand it up. It takes some time to stand it up. We're not developing it. It's pre-built, but we have to stand it up. We have to configure it. And then we can go to, and we're doing this now, we can review with each one of our training partners, what services do you specifically want? If you want tier 2 services, as Laura described, we want to develop a participation agreement with you that describes what those are. So we're looking to bring funding partners on imminently, and we're looking to sign participation agreements with a core set, probably 4 to 6 payers and as many major providers as just a start. And we're looking at this first wave of contracts and implementations covering about almost 60% of the covered lives in Massachusetts. And we still have another 6 to 7 health plans that we want to engage. And obviously, the number of providers is considerable. We have not only the acute care environment, but we have post-acute care. We have a lot of people who are affected by the CMS 57F rule, and who bear the administrative burden and the procedural burden, workflow burden of prior auth, are going to benefit from this, and we have to meet those needs as well. So we're very excited. We're getting to yes, and we're just about to close that process. So Lauren, I'll turn it back to you.
Thanks. So as Denny said, we're talking with a lot of payers and providers in Massachusetts. We've got kind of a core set of folks who are, actively providing us comments on the funding agreements. We've got participant agreements under review as well. And actually, I'm looking now, you said we've got just over 60%. I think on this slide, this should be close to 70 something, but I think just over 60% who are going to probably move first. We're talking with a bunch of other payers and providers, or have planned conversations. You'll see we have a lot of those national payers on the right-hand side. We've initiated some conversations. Our goal now is to get those regional payers and providers on the network, and then we'll return to those conversations. This is our timeline, which I know Denny touched upon. So again, looking to execute those funding agreements very soon. Those are imminent, as he said. And then those participant agreements very shortly after, so that we can start this first set of implementation. So onboarding, implementation, part of that, as Denny said, is before that, actually, defining what the payer provider is looking for in the participant agreement, going through implementation, starting the testing, controlled launch, and going live as soon as the end of 2025 and into 2026. And in the meantime, as Denny said, continuing to execute additional agreements with folks and kind of get those implementations in line and ready to go. So we'll have these rolling and iterative implementations, learning as we go, and applying these lessons learned for every set that we have moving through and connecting to the network. This is a little summary of the costs and the resources to go through this implementation and going live on the network. I mentioned this is a primarily payer-funded network, again, paying for their usage, and we are following an allocation model. So again, based on the number of member lives covered by that payer, as additional payers join and folks, again, are sharing this utility, the costs for everyone continue to decrease. I should say, unless there's a significant change in membership or additional volumes, which could up that. For providers, the tier 1 and tier 2 costs are limited. A couple caveats for tier 1: if there is some exceptionally high usage, which we would, estimate the anticipated usage and volume in the beginning, sitting down Z Omega, MHDC, and the provider organization. If there was some excessive usage, we would have another conversation about that. And then, there could be a one-time implementation cost if there are, multiple vendors or technology that it makes it complicated to layer on NEHEN 3.0. So that would be a one-time cost. And again, that would be determined in discussions with MHDC and Z Omega, as well as the provider organization. Providers are also welcome to use the provider access API under tier 2, and that is, mere cents on the dollar to use that. But again, that's optional. In terms of, going through the work and the folks involved to connect to NEHEN 3.0, we're anticipating about 1 to 4 months for providers and 4 to 8 months for payers, depending on, again, their current, IT and technology, their resources, their size, all of that. And then these are the types of folks that we would look to partner with throughout this implementation process. So technical and implementation support, some dedicated FTEs around, architecture, prior auth, and data exchange. Folks on the project management side, that'd be more of a part-time FTE, and then some governance and executive sponsorship, which would be just a couple hours a month, but those folks would really be ensuring that we're adhering to the timeline that the provider or payer organization wants to hit, and removing any blockers as they come up. So moving into some of the conversations we've had with folks as we talk about NEHEN 3.0, this is a really big technical, not only a technical shift, but also a shift in workflow and a shift in culture. And so, I know we're not unique in this, but we are hearing of a lot of folks that are in organizations who are now talking with other folks in their organizations in different departments now more than ever. And with that, there are a lot of different questions on the technology side, on the workflow side, and on kind of the external or cultural side. And it's really important that everyone has a shared understanding and an answer to these questions. So we've kind of broken it out in that sense. And we also know a lot of this is matching, the Wheaties prior authorization survey that they put out. There's a lot of challenges in determining an interoperability strategy and making sense of the technology and also how it fits among other exchange mechanisms, and we're getting those questions too. So starting with the technology, we've had folks ask about FHIR APIs. Are they ready to be used? Are we going to look back and think, oh no, we should have gone in another direction? One thing we like to point out is APIs themselves are not new. We see them in banking, we see them in online shopping and travel. These APIs are providing this immediacy for the consumer. And so the healthcare industry is lagging in terms of adopting APIs, but those are not new. We also, the FHIR APIs, CMS has put their weight behind them. They are required under CMS 0057F. We've also seen them used successfully according to the Da Vinci IGs with Regents and Multicare. And then, another thing we like to point out too is, looking toward, once we adopt the APIs, and are we going to regret it? We can look back to the recent or relatively recent upgrade in X12, going from 4010 to 5010. And that was a complex implementation. It sounded there were more opportunities for testing that could have happened. Better communication, both internal and externally with vendors. There were a lot of issues with that implementation, but it did lay the groundwork to transition to ICD-10. It did improve, the standardization of those administrative transactions. And I don't think anyone looks back and thinks, we shouldn't have upgraded to 5010. We should still be on 4010. Denny, anything you wanted to add there before I move on to the next?
No, I think it's a good point. I mean, nobody, change is a painful thing. And in healthcare, which is such a conservative industry, organizations often are more than willing to be second or third, but being first is not something that they're comfortable with. So, we've spent a lot of time working with our payer and provider members to show what else is being done across the country. As Lauren mentioned, the folks from Regents and Multicare have done tremendous work. What we've seen in a number of other organizations is also demonstrated without a doubt that these RESTful FHIR APIs are essential to this kind of exchange. So I think, we're seeing that, and, we're excited about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Another, related question we get is NEHEN 3.0 moving or storing any data? So under our tier 1 services, which again are those hosted, pass-through services, we're not. So thinking about APIs, we're not moving any data, we're providing access to it, this real-time data. And what finally clicked for me was thinking about this in terms of a library. If you go to the library and you read a book there, you're not leaving the premises with the book. You're not making a copy of the book and leaving. You're reading the book at the library. That is what these RESTful APIs are doing. Danny, anything else you'd like to add with that?
No, I think that's a fundamental concept. It's different. We live in a world where for health information exchange has been about exchanging large blocks of data. The IHE, the IHE standard, the CCD, component clinical document architecture is moving a lot of data from one place, usually from one electronic health record to another. Whereas APIs, as you point out, Lauren, are moments in time. I remember just to extend the library example, and this is going to really date myself. I remember you know, in college having to write a term paper, go to the library with a stack of index cards. And instead of taking out all the books, I just read the book, read through each book, and I found the passages that I needed, the reference that I needed. I wrote that on an index card. And I did that for however many books I needed to assemble the knowledge that I needed. And I didn't leave with those books. I didn't leave with photocopies of those books. I left with my stack of cards, which once I was done with, I threw away. So it's a different kind of way of thinking about data. And, we don't move or store, we're not moving or storing data. We're making data available for decision making, available for use. And that's a fundamental change between the way we've handled information exchange versus how we're now talking about information sharing. And sharing is different. And these RESTful APIs make that possible.
Thank you for adding that. I'm gonna turn it right back to you, Denny, to talk a little bit about AI, and because AI is everywhere right now, and everyone is regulating it, and there are a lot of concerns with how it's used.
Yeah, we see AI, AI prior authorization tools, if you will, being marketed to providers and payers, and we think they can be extremely valuable. I mean, we're going to need AI to improve the quality of the electronic health record if it's going to be suitable for commerce. Right now, there's considerable variance in the relative quality or usability of data in the EHR. For example, if important clinical information is embedded in notes or in text format, it's not available for consumption. It's not available for real-time use. And we think that providers are going to need AI solutions to prepare themselves for prior auth and to do as much of a job as they can. For example, to look at a history of prior authorizations in the past and understand, for these services and these procedures, what kind of documentation did I need to have? And do I have that documentation ready for me ready for the health plan when I have to follow through on a prior authorization, say documentation, templates, and rules, the second step in the prior authorization process. If you do need a prior auth, you're going to find out, yes, you need a prior auth, but you also need to have the following documentation available and submitted to the health plan. That's a valuable use for AI on the provider side. On the health plan side, we see really valuable uses for AI to get knowledgeable about building better clinical evidence for their clinical guidelines and for their medical policies. Historically, the evidence that health plans have collected has been a research effort involving a lot of clinical expertise. It involves a lot of person hours to do, and we now know that the health plans can use a number of AI solutions to build up what they need to learn about clinical data and improve the quality of evidence that goes behind their prior authorization policies and rules. So we think AI fits, but AI doesn't do the prior authorization itself. It's fundamentally, for reasons that are both cultural and technological, automated prior authorization is a conversation. And we know that, the first version of this conversation is going to be with RESTful APIs. We suspect in future versions, and we follow folks like Josh Mandel and others who are talking about ways in which AI will be able to advance this conversation further in the future. But we don't see AI being a first order component of automation. We see it as a first order technology to bring trading partners up to the level they need in order to do commerce effectively, And then we will see AI coming into the prior authorization process more and more. But that's future looking. Right now, we're looking to make using automation, sort of AI 1.0, not really artificial intelligence, but automation as being the core mechanism. But we as an organization are committed to looking at these other technologies as they become more and more important and more valuable, and considering how they might help us make prior authorization and other data sharing initiatives work better for payers and providers.
Absolutely. Denny, do you want to talk as well about, the questions we get around internal and external or vendor readiness?
Yeah, we're seeing vendors being, especially with respect to the electronic health records and the practice management systems, we see most of the major players getting themselves ready for FHIR-based exchange. It simply has to be done. The existing document exchange formats are burdensome. If you get a document from a provider as a health plan, you have to parse that document. You don't have high fidelity granular data ready for use. You have to go through this parsing and this deconstruction process that is difficult and demanding. So we see provider EHRs getting up to speed. They know they have to be able to make their native FHIR accessibility available to their healthcare providers, trading partners. Now, each one will do it a different way. We have an Epic consortium or collaborative that is a coalition that is working with Epic to understand how can we as a community through NEHEN 3.0 integrate with Epic, because Epic is a big player in Massachusetts where we have a lot of academic health systems and large teaching hospitals and a number of community hospitals who use it. We also know Meditech is moving aggressively into this and others. So we see readiness, which was a concern, kind of a trailing concern on the provider side, starting to accelerate and starting to pick up. On the health plan side, we're seeing readiness happen with vendors like Omega, with organizations like MCG and Interqual, helping to provide, not these static PDF documents that serve as the foundation for policies, guidelines, and medical necessity criteria, but computable guidelines that are ready for machine use. We see a number of, care management, utilization management, population health management systems that are being tuned to use the clinical data that's going to become available. Health plans have lived in the world of ICD codes, CPT codes, HCPCS codes, and now we're talking SNOMED, LOINC, RX norm, and others, where the vocabulary of healthcare has expanded. And we think the internal and external readiness is accelerating. There's a tremendous amount of investment going into this, but we wouldn't be at the stage we are with respect to the conversations we're having with our health plan partners and with our provider partners if they didn't feel that they and their trading partners were going to be ready for this. So internal and external readiness is really happening. I think the second bullet point, where does NEHEN fit among all these exchange mechanisms out there? We have TEFCA, we have the regional HIEs, we have the Epic Payer platform, we have a number of mechanisms out there and a number of approaches to exchanging data, but we don't have the kinds of approaches that we're talking about, which are about sharing data, as we described earlier. And ultimately, prior authorization is going to require, and the exchange and real-time use of clinical data between payers and providers is going to require a payer and provider exchange. TEFCA's provider to provider. The regional HIEs are provider to provider. We don't really have payer-to-payer exchanges, except when it comes to the bulk exchange of enrollee data when an enrollee changes health plans. But we know that, what we have to provide is a real-time, high-fidelity network for payers and providers that promotes commerce. The HIEs that we have out there, whether they're national HIEs or regional HIEs, are really around, the treatment part of treatment payment and operations. They're really about treatment, and that serves a valuable purpose, but it doesn't solve the problem of prior authorization automation. What we need to do prior authorization automation is an exchange mechanism that uses the most modern technologies and enables the real-time use of high-fidelity data for both payers and providers. And that's a RESTful API, FHIR API-based approach. And, we've had lots of conversations, and we would love to come back to Weedy and talk about all these different exchange mechanisms and where they fit. We have Epic providers who are saying, why don't the health plans use the Epic Payer platform? Well, it's a very, it's an excellent platform. Epic builds excellent technology, but it's only useful for Epic providers. So if a health plan in our marketplace looks across all the providers, they have to be able to do for providers who are on Meditech, Cerner, Athena Health, eClinicalWorks, what they do for Epic. And that does so. They need a solution that really is one that supports all of those trading partner relationships. And I think the last point, they recognize on what we can do with NEHEN 3.0 that is really powerful. The technology is exciting. The technology is something that's essential, but it's not sufficient. What we bring are three things. We bring the technology. We bring a network of payers and providers who have worked together for decades. And lastly, we bring trust. Our single greatest asset as an organization is the trust we've engendered among our community over the last 48 years. So we are looking at how do we do this together? Economically, doing this alone is a prohibitively expensive process. The cost for some payers in our network, the cost of participating in our network and connecting to dozens of providers, if not, multiples of that, is less than the cost of trying to do it themselves for one provider. So that idea of doing it together using scale, because once we connect a provider to our network, that provider is available to all the other plans on the network. Once we connect a plan to the network, that plan is available to all the other providers in the network. So it's connect once, use many times. We don't have to repeat for each trading partner pair an implementation. We do it once for payers, once for the providers, and they're able to exchange with everyone. So that idea of doing it together is not only practical, collaboration is great, but it's really, it's economically overwhelmingly positive. The ROI on doing this collaboratively just crushes any consideration of trying to do this, as this freestanding organization.
Yeah. Thank you, Denny. And I hope everyone remembers what you say as I add a little bit of detail. I don't want to detract from the excellent way you just described that. I mean, going back for a second just to those multiple types of exchanges, as Denny said, like there's no one size fits all solution for every purpose of why you would exchange data and who you would exchange it with. And so, this is our view in Massachusetts and what we think will work for our payers and providers, as Denny said, is by offering this conversational type of transaction. Is prior auth required? Yes, here's the documentation you need for us to make a decision. Great, thank you. Here's the documentation you've requested. Great, here's your decision, it's approved. All of that is in real time, and that makes more sense than operating on a document-based type of transaction, which kind of just takes turns shifting the burden for folks to go through the data. As Denny said, this is providing this discrete and high fidelity data so that patients have access to their data and they have access to it in real time. The folks involved with the patient in their care journey have access to the right data at the right time. So, we see NEHEN 3.0 as, fit for purpose for prior authorization in Massachusetts, as well as for clinical data exchange. And then the other piece that Denny mentioned is we're this modern day hub and spoke model where we are able to provide this single point of access for our trading partners. So we've mentioned, we're working to put together these coalitions for different EHRs. We have, great indications that some of these EHR vendors are going to enable direct integration for prior authorization automation. We know some EHRs are going to support the Smart on FHIR pop-up as part of that workflow for providers. And then we have providers who are on an EMR or another practice management system, or maybe they're still paper-based and what they're using doesn't support those types of integration. So we have a web-based portal for them to connect, and it's the single interface for them to connect their payer trading partners. And then on the payer side, again, commercial payers, government payers, for covered lives in Massachusetts. And then for payers who contract out to third-party vendors, we can connect directly to them. That's an endpoint on the network. Or if they'd still like the information to go through the health plan and then to the third-party vendor, we can do that as well. But it's really, we're enabling this connectivity across the community to solve this issue that our community has agreed is a huge issue. And, MHDC, as Denny said, is this trusted facilitator who is providing the shared utility for folks to use. So I think we'll end it there and go for any questions, and I can put the slides back up if anyone has any questions on that, but maybe for discussion, I'll take them down. And I've seen.
All right, I'm looking at the chat and let's see what we have. Let's see, I see a question from Sam who says, how do provider systems connect to NEHEN? Do they install software from your organization, from their EMR? How much customization is required? We'd like there to be as little customization as possible, Sam. As Lauren pointed out, there are 3 ways that we connect providers. One is we have direct integration with their EMR, and that's facilitated by, by native FHIR interoperability that is being increasingly supported by some of the major electronic health record vendors. For providers who are on systems that are not yet compliant or not yet fully supportive of direct FHIR API integration, we provide this Smart on FHIR app, which is basically, a multi-payer but highly customized experience, where if I'm a clinician and I'm seeing a patient, or I'm an administrator in the back office and I'm responsible for prior auths, when I complete the submission of a coverage requirements discovery request and I find out, yes, you do need to prior auth and here are the documents you need, instead of being able to retrieve the documents natively from the electronic health record, the Smart on FHIR app can retrieve some content from the electronic health record app, but it may have additional content that the provider, the administrator, will need to enter into that smart form that pops up in the EHR. And that's a supported, technology for integration into electronic health records. And it's built, the Smart has been around for a long time, hatched out of Boston Children's Hospital by Josh Mandel and others. And it's going to be invaluable for organizations that are on smaller and not yet fully compliant EMRs. And then we have providers who, don't use any technology. They use payer portals. They go onto the, to Payer Access portal to submit a claim or to request prior auth. They go onto another payer's portal to do the same, and a third payer's portal to do the same. And what we're providing them is a multi-payer portal, so that when they go online to check for prior authorization, they can do it for every one of their patients, irrespective of what health plans there are, and NEHEN will route those requests directly to the respective health plans. And it's the same. It's a different interface, but it uses the same APIs that integrate the Smart on FHIR app and that provide direct integration into the EHR. So customization might be required if you want to do more than that, or if you have multiple instances of the same electronic health record. For example, we have organizations that may have 1 or 2 different Epic instances that are different. They're not the same. And we have a number of organizations that have, the hospital on one system and the medical groups on another, the practices on another. That may be where we have a level of customization or a level of deeper integration and broader integration than would normally be the case. But we don't see that as being problematic. We see that as just, meeting our clients, especially our provider customers, where they're at. All right, now Chris is asking, will there be subscription or CDS hooks built in? Yes and yes. How we use subscriptions and how we use CDS hooks is going to be an important consideration, especially when it comes to the exchange of clinical data for quality reporting. Subscriptions are invaluable because you don't want to keep pinging the system to find out if a pending prior authorization has been approved, or if a document, not a document, but a clinical data exchange or sharing has been completed. You want to be able to have a subscription that says, you know, it's been done. You don't have to keep checking on it. It's been done. So yes, we want to stay leaning as far forward as we can without falling down into the best technologies for the best purposes. So we see those two services as being critical: the ability to have subscriptions and the ability to use CDS hooks. And Stephen is asking, does NEHEN intend for its EHR integrations and point of care workflows to replace the provider portal experience? You bet. You bet. We think having multiple payer portals is difficult. Some organizations are going so far as to invest in kind of automation, what I would characterize as sort of these macro or Rube Goldberg kind of connections that they can automate to multiple payer portals. And we're like, it's like the streets of Boston. You're paving the cow paths. It's a very complicated way to work with multiple payer portals. We can provide you a single multi-payer portal. So we think that replacing the current portal experience is a huge benefit to providers. And we have a portal solution that we use for our EDI exchange that is a multi-payer portal, and our clients love it. They think, we have clients who use other electronic health records where EDI services are built into those electronic health records, and they don't want to use that because the user experience with our portal is better. And not to say that that's always the case, but it's important that we replace these multiple portals, which is kind of like having multiple fax machines. It's just a digital way of replicating the problem that we have today, and we would like to replace those. So that's a great question. Those were all great questions, and we appreciate your asking them.
And I think one thing I would add on in terms of the portal experience anyway for NEHEN is I think we'll have providers who want this direct integration or the Smart on Fire app pop-up, but are also going to want the portal for different parts of their organization, and that'll work too.
We have to meet providers and we have to meet payers where they are. I mean, that's one of our founding principles. We're not trying to push people up a hill. We're trying to make the journey as smooth and as effective for them as possible. And if that means starting with a multi-payer portal and moving to a level of deeper integration with their EMR, and then moving up further to a level of direct integration, we want to help them on that journey. We don't want to force them to undertake even more work than this process already requires. Keep those questions coming. They're great questions. I see a number of my good friends and colleagues on the call, and thank you for joining us. It's great to see all of you here.
Denny, one thing I want to point out, and I'll let the folks know as well, is Denny will be available at our spring conference taking place May 19th to the 22nd virtually on Zoom, and you'll be continuing the NEHEN conversation with a slightly different perspective. While folks are still typing in their questions, give folks a little bit of a preview of that session on NEHEN 3.0.
Sure. Well, at that session on NEHEN 3.0, Michael, we want to celebrate the fact that we've launched the program and that we've got payers and providers who are being onboarded and ready to transact. Our goal is to devote the second quarter of the year to getting the system stood up and testing integrations with our trading partners, so that by Q3 we actually have people doing prior auth automation with the trading partners that we have on the network. Obviously, in parallel to that, we want to share who else we're bringing onto the network, because obviously the closer we get to as much of a complete experience as possible for our payers and provider community, the better, the more effective the NEHEN will be. But we'll be sharing a bit about that. And we're also going to bring our colleagues from the Mass Collaborative, which is a group of association representatives from the Hospital Association, the Massachusetts Medical Society, the Massachusetts Association of Health Plans, and Blue Cross Blue Shield, who are doing some really leading work in provider credentialing and in the whole world of, supporting the ability to, improve the provider directory for the purposes of credentialing and accreditation. So we're excited about that as well.
That's fantastic. And once again, folks, weedy.org to register May 19th through the 22nd. We have actually pre-conference content coming on May 14th. There is a question, a new one that popped up in the chat from Sam.
Sam, how are you approaching the DTR API implementation? To what extent are you focusing on questionnaire versus pulling EMR data via CQL? I think that's going to be determined on there's not a one size fits all there. We are approaching, we would ideally like to have direct EHR integration, but we also know that even if you have direct EHR integration, you're not always going to find the data where it's supposed to be. It's just a fact. We've got the level of sort of digital curation that needs to happen across provider EMRs is pretty significant. And some organizations pride themselves on having very high quality, discrete data where it should be. And for them, the direct integration experience is going to be very powerful. But other organizations are going through the fact that they have a lot of clinical data embedded in notes and free text. And that makes, the direct DTR implementation useful, but it makes it incomplete. So we think, that's where we have to be able to pop open a questionnaire that says, we got some of the information from your EMR, but we didn't get everything. And here's what we couldn't find. And, we've been talking with providers about this for well over a year. We know that some are investing in solutions that will improve the ability to use, OCR and natural language processing and AI to look at clinical notes and provide, their equivalents in discrete data fields. That's going to be a challenge. So we're going to meet providers where they are. If they're ready for direct DTR implementation and are able to have that happen with a minimum amount of questionnaire, sort of intrusion, if you will, great. But we expect that that's going to be more the exception than the rule. So we will pull what we can via CQL, and we will make sure that it's already in the form is pre-populated with what we were able to extract from the EMR. But we expect there will be a number of, the majority of providers will, and this is a virtuous cycle as providers do this more and more, and they realize I keep getting asked for this thing, this lab result or this proof of a prior visit or a different imaging modality, and I keep having to go search for it. Maybe I should put it in a place where it can be retrieved immediately. So we think we can create that kind of virtuous circle. But we see it as being a journey, and that many providers are going to need that form or that questionnaire to tell them what we couldn't find, what was not available directly in the EMR, and we need their help in getting. So probably, a bit of both, with probably more on the questionnaire side to start. We would love to have providers who are fully able to go direct, but we expect that will take a couple of cycles before people get really familiar with and prepared to answer all those questions automatically, rather than having to go back into the EMR as a staff member or in some cases as a physician. We try to minimize physicians doing this, but if a staff member has to go back into the EMR and find it, they're going to put it in a place where it should be much more easy to find in the future. We think that is going to improve that process a great deal. A great question. Other questions? Thank you, John. It's good to see you. Good to at least hear from you virtually. I hope you're well.
Your presentation was just so clear. No very few follow-up questions.
No questions. It's just intuitively obvious to the casual observer, right?
Well, this was great. Lauren, Denny, fantastic. Thank you so much for another great presentation. And we look forward to more updates with NEHEN 3.0. This is a fantastic relationship we have with MHDC, where we're offering almost quarterly updates on your journey at NEHEN 3.0. So once again, folks, you can hear more from Denny and hopefully Lauren at our spring conference, May 19th to the 22nd, where they go into greater detail, additional detail about NEHEN 3.0. We'll give you some time back. Enjoy the rest of your work day and work week, and we look forward to seeing you at future WEDI educational events.
Thanks.
Thank you all.
For having us.
And thank you, Michael. And thank you, Lauren.
Thank you, Denny.